In the name of our God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. We hear these words from the prophet Isaiah this morning. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. But you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married. These are God's words given to God's people through the prophet Isaiah. And I read these words over and over this past week. And each time I did, I saw the images of the Easton and Palisades fires in Los Angeles County. Images of grief and loss and barren land, smoldering ashes and desolation. And yet God speaks. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. Land in ruins, rubble that were once buildings, churches, homes that now cease to exist. And yet God still speaks. Your land shall no more be termed desolate. It's difficult to reconcile those words with the images coming out of Los Angeles County. They don't fit together. They stand side by side as paradox. And whether it's a raging wildfire that destroys, or a natural disaster of any type that devastates an entire community, or on a more personal level, the death of a loved one, a divorce, the loss of a job, cancer, illness, the paradox exists and cannot be resolved. On the one hand, God's words are true, and on the other, suffering is real. The power of the Christian story is that both coexist. Both profound suffering and yet the goodness of our God. This dichotomy that we each live in our journeys of faith is also found so starkly in the life and witness of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who we commemorate this day, but for many of us, commemorate every day. His life and his death are examples of God's goodness and suffering. His words and actions continue to inspire us to seek justice and reconciliation in our world. A world where suffering is real, but cannot overwhelm the realness of our God. Dr. King is a man who embraced nonviolence in the face of suffering. He knew it up close. His house was bombed. Living day to day for 13 years under constant threats of death, falsely accused of being insincere and seeking the limelight for his own glory, stabbed by a member of his own racial community, slugged in a hotel lobby, jailed over 20 times. Dr. King knew suffering, and yet he traveled up and down the length and width of this world preaching nonviolence and the redemptive power of God's love. Lives like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. serve as a window to see the redemptive power of our God, and in the face of suffering, we see an example of God's mercy that counters the falsehood that there's a scarcity of human dignity in this world. This is the work of the season of Epiphany, a season that is all about showing forth God's truth. The season of Epiphany is a period between Christmas and Lent where we are given scriptural examples of God's showing forth. This week, we celebrate Jesus turning water into wine during the wedding at Cana. And this is one of 3 traditional focal points for Epiphany through which Jesus' identity shows forth. The other 2 being the visit of the Magi and Jesus' baptism, the passage we heard last week. Still a largely unknown rabbi, Jesus is invited to a wedding along with his disciples and his mother. Mary appears exactly twice, only 2 times in the Gospel of John. In this scene, at the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, and at the foot of the cross at the end of it. On both occasions, Jesus addresses Mary as woman, an ancient form of address roughly equivalent to ma'am, a relatively formal gesture of respect. I'm from the South, so I know that ma'am is respectful. Ma'am. The fact that Mary is concerned about the wine running low may mean that the bride and the groom are close relatives or friends of Mary. We don't know, but in any case, in the ancient world, this kind of shortage was far more than mere inconvenience. Wedding celebrations would often last a week, and wine was considered an essential mark of hospitality. Running out of wine would be a major embarrassment for the host family, and the shortage may also indicate that both the family and the attendees lacked resources, since wedding guests often brought wine as a contribution to the festivities. In other words, as the Gospel of John tells it, this is a relatively modest, humble gathering of ordinary people. And this is where Jesus' public ministry begins. The story begins in disappointment, in there not being enough. And isn't this a current theme for us in the present moment? We can easily stay in postures of scarcity. There is never enough. And the little bit that we have is in danger. This is a constant hurdle for all of us. We don't think that we have enough or that we are enough. All we know is that the wine has gone out. And so Mary says to her son, Jesus, they have no wine. She does not say there is no wine, but they have no wine. The issue is not about the scarcity of wine, it's about the people. We can wonder why the wine of God is present or how it became present, but the real conversation, the real focus is what we do about it. What do we do about it? What will we do now that the wildfires have destroyed? What will we do as we enter this new presidential administration? What will we do to remember the witness of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? The question is not why there is suffering. There is no discussion in our scriptures about why the wine had run out. Jesus does not blame or condemn. He does not say that this happened so that the guests can learn a lesson or that someday they will understand why. He does not say, don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Instead, Jesus says, fill the jars with water. Jesus invites them to participate. God is always inviting us to participate in God's life and work. Fill the jars with water, is what Jesus says. That is his response. Fill the jars with water. The servants filled them to the brim, and the chief steward tasted the water that had not only become wine, but good wine, the best wine. The fact of the matter is, there are empty jars all around us, all over our world, in our cities, in our churches, and in our very lives. These jars are waiting to be filled, not with explanations as to why they are empty, but with water. Our work is to carry water so much more than it is to seek and solve and offer answers. Carrying and offering water is the faithful response to the wildfires that destroy in our lives. That's what Dr. Martin Luther King did. As we reflect on Dr. King's life and legacy, let us celebrate his commitment to justice. And remember, one of his favorite biblical allusions was the rolling waters of justice. which might end in a mighty river, but first begin with small acts of carrying water. And we all have water to offer. We offer water through our compassion and mercy, seeing the other as the face of God in our midst, not dismissing those who we think may be less than, because no one is less than in the household of God. We carry water in our generosity and are honoring the dignity of every human being. We carry water through our prayers, through our tears, our remembering those who have died fighting for justice and peace, and caring for the living, those who are marginalized in our world, those who live on thin ice. Water is offered in every hour spent rebuilding homes and schools and churches and rebuilding lives. Every time you speak out for justice, you are carrying water. Whenever you live in hope and refuse despair, you are carrying water. You give water in your love. When you trust resurrection more than death, you are carrying water. You are filling the jars that Jesus instructs in our gospel passage. The story of the wedding in Cana is a story of inadequacy being transformed into abundance by the generosity of God. The same thing that happened in the wedding in Cana is happening in our lives, in our society, if we have the courage to carry the water, to fill the jar, to be a source of God's transformative love in a world that needs it now more than ever. What the life of Dr. Martin Luther King teaches us, what the story of our faith shows us, is that suffering, no matter how real, is never the end of the story. Never. Amen.